So what skill are we covering today? Penalty kick ideas. So when practicing those penalty kicks, you generally want two different penalty kicks. One that goes to this side of the net and the other that goes to this side of the net to make sure that no matter the situation, you've practiced with that ball going both ways. So now it's so important that as we approach the ball, our run up, no matter if we're going to that side of the net or this side, our run up is going to be exactly the same. And if you can, and this one's even a little bit more difficult, a little bit more advanced though, and it's gonna make a big difference, is you wanna make sure that plant foot is planted exactly the same for both styles. So what that means is if your foot is planted, and to really throw off the defender, if you can plant that right down the middle, they're not gonna be able to read it as well. Notice, if I'm planting this way, there's a better chance that that ball's going that way than it is this way. Similarly, the goalies will recognize over many, many years of playing, my plant foot's planted that way, they're expecting that ball probably to go that way, and their instincts are gonna have them dive in that direction. Now you can use that to your advantage and point them in the wrong way, but if you can point directly down the middle, you're not going to give them any signs and you're going to be able to practice consistently going to either side of the net. So now, with that being said, super important that if we're trying to do that, what's the most key thing here is that we've got to follow through and point our hips where we want that ball to go. Because if our plant foot isn't pointing in the perfect direction we want the ball to go, we've got to ensure that our hips are. So it is so important that our run up is the same no matter which side of the net that we're going. Because as you're a youngster, you're going to be playing a lot of different teams. They're not really going to be watching too much on where your penalty kicks go. But as you get better, as you're watching this channel more and more, as you're advancing in your soccer career, you're going to have much more teams that are going and having someone scout the game, watch you. If you take a penalty kick, they're going to know exactly where you shot it. They're going to be trying to get footage on you as you elevate your career. So it's so important that you make it so difficult for them to determine which way you're actually going to go with those shots, with those penalty kicks. So the best way to do this is have a run up that's the same for both. Me, because I generally like either inside of the foot pass shots, generally that far post, but as you advance with that, you can do those driven shots. I generally like it to the right hand post, but it's so important that my run up, 45-degree angle run up, is going to be same for either way. So generally, if I'm going to that far post, I'm going to be using a pass shot, versus if I'm going to that near post, I'm going to be striking it with the bone of my foot, so that my plant foot can be exactly the same in either situation. It's going to make it much more difficult for the goalie to have any signs or tells on which way you're actually going. So that second thing is when we plant that foot, a keeper's trying to get any advantage they possibly can. And now, if you're 7, if you're 8 years, 9 years old, and you're going against a goalkeeper, they're not watching your plant foot. That's just a reality. But as you get into that high school level, especially college, professional level, they're trying to study you. They're trying to figure this stuff out. And one key takeaway is there's a half second in there between you planting and striking that ball. So they're going to be focusing on where that actual plant foot is pointed. So if you can, practice with that point foot directly down the middle of the net. Don't point it to where you want the ball to go, and if you can, point it in the opposite direction so maybe you'll throw them off. That's very helpful. But make sure if you can, point that directly down the middle so that it's very deceptive to that keeper so they don't get any additional insights on which way you're trying to go with that shot. So soccer squad, if you could, in the comment section below, comment yes if you're that player on your team that's actually taking the penalty kicks. Otherwise, comment no. And if you comment no, I've been there before where you're not the best player on your team, you're not that person taking penalty kicks. So don't worry about it. Comment no if you're not taking that. Third, driven shots as opposed to shots with the inside of your foot, your toe, or the outside of your foot are a little bit better because they're much more powerful. Even if the goalie gets a hand on the ball, they're unlikely to stop the ball because it will be too powerful and deflect off their hand, while still ending up in the back of their net. Furthermore, driven shots travel a bit faster than other types of shots, which means the goalie has less time to react. Less time to react is great news for the person taking the penalty because even if the shot is not perfectly placed, but is still within the frame of the net, then there's a very high chance it will still end up in the back of the net. Now notice, with these penalty shots that I'm taking, I am using the inside of my foot, and notice I'm doing with the opposite. A little bit of an injury with my right hip flexor, so I'm taking these with my left foot, my opposite foot, and to make sure I'm really accurate, not focusing so much on the power, more on the placement, I'm using that left foot, I'm using a pass shot. But in a lot of ways, if I'm taking right-footed shots and I'm going to that far post, it's going to be a pass shot. Versus, if it's that near post, I'm going to be striking it with a driven shot. So my plant foot can be exactly the same. An example of a prominent player who only takes driven shots on penalty kicks is Jamie Vardy of the Leicester City Football Club English Premier League team. If you watch the 2015-2016 Leicester City FC campaign where the Foxes, their mascot, came up from nowhere to win one of the most highly contested league titles in all of sports, you would have seen more than a handful of Jamie Vardy's penalty kicks. I had him on my fantasy soccer team, so I surely saw them. Jamie's objective with every penalty shot and nearly every shot taken in the game is to drive the ball as hard as possible when shooting. He did this exceptionally well in their title campaign by striking low and driven shots into the back of the net to lead his team to the title and to be his team's leading scorer. And Soccer Squad, as a bit of a bonus tip, as you advance in your career and become better and better at taking those penalty kicks, consider getting your head up a little bit as you go to strike that ball. Because there's going to be a half second in there where oftentimes that goalie is going to dive and guess where they think you're going with the ball. So if you're able to get your head up a little bit as you're striking it, notice I'm looking maybe 5, 6, 7 yards forward. So as I see them dive one way or the other, I'm simply just sliding that ball in the opposite direction of the way they dived. Now, this is a bit more advanced, and honestly, in a lot of my games, I'm still picking a spot on the net and striking it into that spot versus actually getting my head up. But as you become a little bit better, something that you can do to actually practice this skill is head to the field and have an actual goalie, I'm not talking one of your friends, someone that can't play goalie very well, but an actual goalie, guess and try to stop you which way so you can practice getting that head up and being able to put that ball past that goalkeeper. So for that first thing that we want to avoid, Soccer Squad, when it comes to penalty kicks, is don't practice 20 different ways of trying to score on a penalty kick. You only need 2. Okay, don't waste your time. Don't be a jack of all trades and have 20 ways to score and you're decent, you're average at all of them, versus definitely be that person that's a master of 2 trades and you can score in either direction. Okay, you've got 2 different ones and you use them depending on the keeper that you're going against in the game situation. Now, make sure to stick around for that pro tip or actually point out whether you should be even taking and practicing these penalty kicks. Super important to understand whether you should waste or invest practice time in actually taking the PKs. So now, that second thing, and probably even more important, is that you got to avoid fearing a mistake. So many soccer players step up to that line, their heart's racing, it's pounding, they got family and friends watching, the coach is counting on them, literally pick them in order to take the PK in the game, and they're so worried about making a mistake and messing up. Guess what? Your form crumbles under the pressure. Don't worry so much about making a mistake because what you focus on is what you get. Instead, focus on the challenge of can I score? Focus on the excitement of how you will feel after you score. Mentally rehearse going through the motions of actually striking that ball so that you get a few laps out in your head before you actually take your first one in reality. And doing it in your mind is just as effective as actually doing it in reality. So get a few laps in even before you actually strike the ball. So now, Soccer Squad, it's so important that when you do this, you make sure to subscribe to this video series because this next video series is actually not shooting and finishing anymore. It's going to be on your soccer mindset. So how do we practice our penalty kicks? Honestly, grab a soccer ball or a few, grab a goalie if you can, or take a shoe, a cone, whatever you got, and put it 1.5 feet in from each one of the posts and have at it. Okay, it's going to take time, dedication, persistency, and a lot of practice to become a lot better at those penalty kicks and become confident with them. But if you're expected to take them on your team, then you want to make sure you practice them effectively so you can make sure that your team can rely on you when the game is on the line. If you want to learn more about what to do in a 1v1, 2v1, 2v2, or 1v2, then grab that second book in the Understand Soccer series, Soccer Shooting and Finishing, today on Amazon.com using the link in the description below. Disclaimer/pro tip. If you are not the first or second option on your team selected when a penalty kick is awarded, then it is highly advised to limit how often you practice penalty kicks. Instead, focus on practicing the other areas in soccer that will make a much bigger difference for you. And once you begin producing more goals in an actual game, then come back to this video. I write the disclaimer because only a few times in your career, if ever, will you ever have the ball perfectly stopped on a penalty line/dot with all the time in the world to approach the ball at a pace that is comfortable to you. It just hardly ever happens, so it is not the most productive thing to spend your practice time on unless your coach would select you to take one in a game. Keep in mind that a significant portion of the practice time that you have on the field should be spent on things that are necessary to do in a game. Things like passing, dribbling, shooting a driven shot with the ball rolling, or being able to defend.